The berry they tried to erase. Your doctor just told you your blood pressure is dangerously high. Your grandmother was diabetic. You're worried about your heart. You've tried everything, the gym, the diet apps, the expensive supplements. But what if the answer wasn't hiding in some laboratory across the ocean? What if it was growing right here on American soil the entire time? And what if powerful forces deliberately kept it from you? I'm William Scott from Golden Age Gardening, and today we're uncovering one of the most stunning cover-ups in food history. The initial mystery. Let me ask you something. When you hear superfood, what comes to mind? Probably blueberries, right? They're everywhere. Your local smoothie shop has them, the health websites praise them, your Instagram feed is filled with them. But I'm about to change everything you think you know about nutritional power. Scientists tested 276 common foods in a laboratory setting. They measured something called polyphenol content, basically the compounds that fight disease in your body. Guess what ranked number 1? Not blueberries, not goji berries, not acai, a berry that 99% of people have never even tasted, a berry that disappeared from American farms decades ago, a berry that indigenous nations fought to survive on for centuries. It's called the Aronia berry. Some people know it as chokeberry. And if you're watching this video, this might be the most important nutritional information you've heard all year. If you want to know what your ancestors knew, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We're diving deep into what the food industry doesn't want you to discover.
The science nobody talks about. Let me show you the numbers because numbers don't lie. Blueberries test at around 4,600 on the ORAC scale. That's the measurement scientists use to rank antioxidant power. The Aronia berry? Over 16,000. That's more than 3 times stronger. Not a little bit stronger, 3 times, 4 times in some tests. Now, imagine if a car manufacturer created a vehicle that ran 4 times longer on a single tank of gas than the leading brand. The competitor would be out of business within a year. But when it comes to food, we don't talk about it that way. Why? Because the story is more complicated than what you see on store shelves. A USDA laboratory ranked Aronia number 1 in polyphenol content. The researchers tested 275 different foods. Only one came out on top. 1. The polyphenols in Aronia berries fight inflammation. They protect your cells from damage. They support your heart. They help regulate blood sugar. They strengthen your immune system. All of that packed into one small dark purple fruit. Before we continue, if you're finding this information helpful, drop a like and let me know in the comments what surprised you most. Are you learning something you didn't expect? Your engagement helps this channel grow and helps more people discover what the food system has hidden. What the tribes knew first. Long before scientists invented laboratories, indigenous nations across North America had already figured out Aronia's power. They didn't need a USDA test. They had something better, thousands of years of survival knowledge. The Lakota people called it a necessity. The Cheyenne understood it as medicine. The Cherokee used it in healing ceremonies. The Potawatomi nations believed it balanced both body and spirit during times of hardship. And they weren't guessing, they were observing results across generations. Picture this. It's winter in the 1800s and temperatures drop so low that regular crops fail. Most plants freeze solid, but Aronia bushes keep producing. The berries survive frost. They thrive in poor soil. They ask for very little and deliver everything. This wasn't luck. This was nature's design. The Lakota and Mandan peoples dried these berries under the sun and combined them with dried meat and animal fat to create something called pemmican. This wasn't just food. This was survival technology. Hunters carried pemmican for weeks on long expeditions. It didn't spoil. It didn't require refrigeration. It provided extreme calories and extreme nutrition. Warriors fueled their journeys on it. Families survived brutal winters on it. The Cherokee medicine practitioners used Aronia juice to treat fever, colds, and digestive problems. The Iroquois communities used it to fight infections and sore throats. When a grandmother needed to keep her grandchildren alive through starvation, she scraped Aronia paste from a hide she'd hidden away for emergencies. The fruit wasn't just food, it was a lifeline.
The nutrition story. Here's what makes Aronia different at the molecular level. Those dark purple-black pigments you see on the skin, those are called anthocyanins. In nature, these pigments protect the berry from harsh sunlight and extreme weather. But in your body, they do the same thing. They protect and repair. They're like tiny defense soldiers working inside your cells. A laboratory in Eastern Europe has been studying Aronia since the 1950s. They've discovered something remarkable. The berry boosts your gut health. It feeds the good bacteria in your digestive system. It reduces inflammation in your intestines. It supports proper digestion. Scientists compared its prebiotic effects to inulin, which is a standard clinical compound used in medicine. One single fruit performing this well across this many different body systems is extremely rare. Eastern European doctors have used Aronia juice to treat high blood pressure since the middle of the 20th century. Poland even conducted public health trials in the 1980s. The results were consistent. Blood pressure dropped, cholesterol levels dropped, there were no major side effects. When pharmaceutical companies sell medications that accomplish the same thing, they charge hundreds of dollars every month. In 2020, researchers at the University of Illinois conducted a specific study on Aronia's effect on blood sugar control. The results were striking. They observed a 15% reduction in glucose spikes in just 8 weeks of extract use. That's not insignificant. That's life-changing for people managing diabetes. A community health clinic in Nebraska began testing Aronia drinks with local indigenous elders who had type 2 diabetes. After 3 months, several participants reduced their insulin dependence. One elder said something that really stuck with me. It's what we used to eat before the canned food came. You could feel the weight in his voice, the loss, the remembering. If you know someone struggling with blood sugar or heart health, this information could matter for them. Share this video with them. Subscribe so you don't miss the next part of this story. How it vanished. But something changed. Something happened that took this powerful berry and pushed it out of sight for 70 years. After World War II, American agriculture transformed completely. The government wanted bigger farms. They wanted faster harvests. They wanted crops that could survive long-distance shipping across the country. The system became about efficiency and profit, not nutrition and health. Aronia berries didn't fit the system. They bruised too easily during transport. They tasted too bitter for the average consumer. They had a short shelf life. There was no clear profit model. No corporate brand could build an empire on them. No supermarket could stock them year-round. In 1948, the United States Department of Agriculture approved massive subsidies for commercial blueberry farming operations. Millions of dollars flowed toward blueberry growers. Aronia received nothing. It wasn't in the system. It wasn't in the plan. If you were a farmer in Iowa or Nebraska during the 1950s, the choice was simple. Tear out your native plants and replace them with blueberries or go broke. The math didn't work any other way. But the story goes much deeper than just economics. Federal boarding schools built a system designed to erase indigenous identity. Traditional foods were banned. Children were forced to eat white bread, canned meat, and processed sugar. They were punished for speaking their native languages and for maintaining their cultural practices. This wasn't accidental, it was deliberate policy. By the 1960s, fewer than 3% of indigenous families kept seed knowledge alive. Fewer than that maintained access to ancestral lands. A single Aronia bush could feed an entire family through the winter. But federal relocation programs forced entire tribes out of their traditional territories and into urban centers, where wild foods became nothing but memories. By the 1980s, you could walk into any grocery store in America and see rows upon rows of blueberries. They were carefully selected to taste sweet. They were bred to grow quickly. They were packaged beautifully. But Aronia was nearly extinct in its native homeland. The fruit didn't just vanish from the market, it was erased from the culture, deliberately. This is the part that history books leave out.
The scientific rediscovery. Something happened in the early 2000s that changed everything.
Researchers noticed a troubling pattern. Blood pressure cases in the United States had tripled since the 1980s. Doctors were confused. They kept asking themselves, why do certain Eastern European countries have so much better health outcomes? Why are their populations healthier? Why do they have lower rates of chronic disease? That question sent researchers digging through old medical records and food studies. They started looking at what Eastern European populations were eating. And there it was. Aronia showed up in the records like a missing file nobody expected to find. Polish scientists had discovered old Soviet-era studies from the 1970s. The research was rough. The papers were handwritten. Some were barely stamped as official, but the numbers were too strong to ignore. The studies claimed that Aronia extract slowed tumor growth in laboratory rats. When Iowa State researchers repeated these trials in 2004, their results matched the old Soviet data. In some tests, Aronia reduced inflammation by more than 40%. The surprise came when they measured the ORAC score. There was that massive gap again. Blueberries averaging around 4,600, Aronia hitting over 16,000. That gap raised eyebrows everywhere in the scientific community. How could this fruit, this nutritionally powerful, vanish from American farms? How did nobody notice? Then came the diabetes research in 2008. The Bulgarian Academy of Sciences conducted a clinical study with 35 adults who had type 2 diabetes. After 90 days of consuming Aronia juice, their average fasting glucose dropped from 193 milligrams per deciliter to around 160. The sample size was small, but the change was significant enough to spark bigger trials across Europe. This momentum reached the American plains. Iowa, Nebraska, and Wisconsin saw small Aronia farms begin appearing around 2010. Growers believed that Aronia could become the next big commercial berry, like cranberries had become. Some farmers planted 20-acre blocks expecting massive national demand to follow. But the grocery store chains showed zero interest. They said the flavor wasn't market-ready. The taste was too bitter. The marketing seemed too complicated. By 2016, many of these farms went bankrupt. The comeback crashed before it really started. The system stacked against it. Here's where the story gets frustrating. Aronia doesn't qualify for the mainstream USDA specialty fruit subsidies because it lacks an official commodity status. That's not a small technicality. That determines everything. When tribal growers try to apply for land grants, when they need crop insurance, when they want access to government support programs, Aronia often falls through the cracks. An Iowa Department of Agriculture report from 2015 showed that only 34% of Aronia growers sold directly to consumers. Compare that to 50% or more for other berry types. The system makes it harder. The rules make it harder. The funding makes it harder. Food companies demand fruit that ships well. They demand fruit that tastes sweet. They demand fruit that can sit on shelves for weeks without spoiling. Aronia's naturally astringent taste, its short, fresh shelf life, and its small yield per acre, often under 1 ton, make mass production risky and unprofitable. A nursery website noted that the berry is often converted into jam or syrup because fresh sales lag. Nobody wants to buy the product in its natural form because the system wasn't designed for it. So here we are, an ancient food with higher nutritional content, stronger medicine credentials, and deeper cultural meaning faces modern rules, modern markets, and modern laws all stacked against it. The deck isn't just stacked, the dealer is rigging the game. This is why your support matters. Subscribe to Golden Age Gardening, comment on this video, share with people who care about real nutrition and real food history. The algorithm controls what gets seen. You control whether this information reaches the people who need it.
The cultural erosion. Cultural disconnection is real, and it has consequences. The boarding school policies from the early 1900s forced indigenous communities away from their lands. These policies stripped away transportable food knowledge. They separated children from the agricultural traditions that sustained their ancestors. When a young person from the Meskwaki Nation asks, "Where's our berry that sustained my ancestors?" the answer often lands in historical silence. The Meskwaki Food Sovereignty Initiative has documented this gap clearly.
They've researched what was lost. They've interviewed elders about forgotten farming practices. They've discovered that knowledge exists, but access to the land and seeds and resources to grow these foods is deliberately restricted. That's not just a food problem. That's a justice problem. As of 2023, Aronia takes up less than 0.01% of all U.S. berry acreage. Think about that number. A fruit once used in survival foods, in sacred ceremonies and early medicine, is now reduced to a footnote, less than 0.01%. The erasure is almost complete.
The comeback effort. But some communities haven't given up, and their work is inspiring. The Meskwaki Nation in Iowa launched their food sovereignty project in 2012. The goal was clear and powerful: grow native, climate-resilient crops on their own land. Aronia was one of the first berries they planted. Why? Because it's tough. It survives frost. It survives heat. It thrives in poor soil. And the elders remembered it. This project runs without major subsidies. It runs without big grants. It operates mostly outside the media spotlight. Still, it grew row by row, seed by seed. By 2018, they were harvesting enough to make community syrups and dried fruit for winter storage. A food that had disappeared from supermarket shelves was back in tribal pantries. The cycle was beginning again. They're not alone. Small tribal gardens in Wisconsin, Montana, and South Dakota are experimenting with Aronia cultivation. Some are using saved seeds passed down through generations. Others rely on wild Aronia patches that still cling to creek beds and forgotten hedgerows. Every new sprout is a quiet act of resistance, farming without waiting for permission, reclaiming knowledge that was supposed to be erased forever. In 2020, a joint project between a native seed cooperative and a Kansas university cataloged over 40 native fruit varieties, including Aronia. They created plans to distribute seeds to 200 tribal growers. The goal is ambitious: reboot the original food web, one berry at a time.
The seed and patent problem. But tribal communities face a problem that most people don't see. When they ask for USDA backing or seed rights, they often receive legal silence. Permits expire without explanation. Genetic data goes missing. Information that should be available simply isn't available. Here's something shocking. In one state, the entire seed strain used by native farms came from a single plant that was traced to a European patent. Think about that. The only seeds available were patented by a foreign company. That means someone else owned the genetic rights to the berry that indigenous nations had cultivated for thousands of years. In 2022, one biotech firm tried to patent a hybrid Aronia strain. They had developed it using DNA from wild native bushes. Nobody asked permission. Nobody compensated the tribes. The patents were applied for anyway. This is resource theft dressed up in modern language. It's colonization that happens in laboratories instead of in forts. It's the same story with different technology. Health outcomes matter. The United States spends over $260 billion every year treating chronic diseases. That's $260 billion. That's the budget for managing diseases that could often be prevented through better nutrition. But what if one forgotten berry could help shift that curve? For tribes like the Lakota, Navajo, and Anishinaabe, chronic illness skyrocketed after their traditional food systems were deliberately broken apart. Today, indigenous communities face diabetes rates more than twice the national average. That's not genetics. It's not their biology. It's disconnection from the foods that sustained their ancestors. It's what happens when a food system is destroyed on purpose. Aronia bushes are climate resilient. They survive floods. They survive heat waves. They thrive in poor soil. That makes them perfect for reservation lands that have been damaged by drought or by mining operations. A crop that asks for very little and gives back everything. Plus, Aronia can be grown without chemical fertilizers. It can be grown without synthetic pesticides. It doesn't require water-intensive irrigation systems. That means sustainable harvests. That means fewer supply chains to depend on. That means genuine food security and independence. the bigger question, but all of that leads to the most important question. Who controls the seeds? Who controls the land? Who has the right to grow? Without tribal seed banks and legal recognition of indigenous plant patents, even a berry as humble as Aronia risks being stolen again. Not in the traditional sense, but through the legal system, through patents, through corporate control. This story isn't really about berries. It's about power. It's about who gets to decide what counts as valuable. It's about what gets preserved and what gets erased. It's about whose knowledge counts and whose gets dismissed. When indigenous nations grow Aronia again, they're not just growing food, they're reclaiming authority. They're rebuilding connection. They're saying no to a system that was designed to erase them. Final message. There's more to this story. There are more native crops you've never heard of. There are more chapters of food history that have been buried. But now, you know about Aronia. You know what the science says. You know what the tribes preserved. You know what the system tried to erase. So here's what I'm asking. Subscribe to Golden Age Gardening. Share this video with someone who cares about real nutrition. Comment below. Tell me what surprised you most about this story. Let me know if you're interested in growing these forgotten foods yourself. Your engagement helps this channel reach more people. Your sharing helps this knowledge spread. Because the next chapter of food history is being written right now, and it doesn't have to disappear.